Think back to when Kevin Costner played the most English hero in history with a California accent, and the villain had to secretly rewrite the film at a Pizza Express to save it. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, hit theaters in June of 1991 and did something a hero movie almost never does. It made the villain the reason people came back. Costner's accent arrived and departed without warning. Morgan Freeman played a Moorish warrior loyal to Robin by a debt of honor, a character so convincing that audiences have spent 30 years assuming he was part of the original legend. He was not. And Alan Rickman played the Sheriff of Nottingham, a role he turned down twice, rewrote in secret, and still had his best scenes cut by the star, who felt the villain was getting too much attention. Directed by Kevin Reynolds and produced on a schedule that can only be described as reckless optimism, Prince of Thieves cost somewhere between $48 and $60 million, grossed $390 million worldwide, and became the second highest grossing film of 1991, beaten only by A Robot from the Future. Today we're climbing back over the castle walls for 15 wild facts you didn't know about Prince of Thieves. The stuntman who saved the film's most beloved character with one offhand remark, the chart record that has stood for 34 years, and the director whose friendship built the whole thing and who didn't attend his own premiere. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the films we grew up on. Let's get into the countdown with number 15. Number 15, the medieval epic won before it had a cast. On Valentine's Day 1990, a small production company called Morgan Creek read a Robin Hood script overnight, discussed it the next morning, and by noon had decided to outbid every studio in Hollywood for it. What they did not have was a director, a cast, or any clear idea how to shoot a medieval epic in the English countryside before winter made the whole thing impossible. What they had was a phone number. 20th Century Fox was the real competition. John McTiernan was attached to direct, the man who had just delivered Die Hard and was midway through Hunt for Red October. Fox had been developing their Robin Hood for 2 years. On paper, they win. It's not close. Morgan Creek's calculation was brutally simple. Hire Kevin Reynolds and Kevin Costner follows. Reynolds had given Costner his first starring role in 1985. They were best friends, and no amount of Fox's firepower could replicate that. It worked inside of days. Costner committed to Prince of Thieves and walked away from the Fox project. McTiernan's Robin Hood never got made. Reynolds had 10 weeks of prep before cameras rolled. No finished cast, no locked locations. A British winter already closing in. The studio that deserved to lose had just won, and what they'd used to win it was someone else's loyalty. Number 14, the Oscar winner who couldn't film his first scene. Morgan Freeman was already on set when Costner arrived, 3 days before his first scene, having spent every available hour finishing Dances with Wolves. The rest of the cast had been in the country for weeks. Reynolds had been prepping for 10. Costner showed up with 72 hours to spare. His first scene, Robin Hood, wading ashore through the cold Sussex Sea in a soaking wool cloak, dragging himself onto English soil after years away. The crew rolled. Costner hit the water. By the end of the day, he was exhausted from the cold. The footage was unusable, and the entire day had to be scrapped. The scene was eventually reshot weeks later, with Costner directing it himself as a second-unit pickup, the star of a film he'd arrived to 3 days late, directing himself in the scene he'd failed to shoot the first time. On March 25, 1991, while Prince of Thieves was still in post-production, Dances with Wolves won 7 Oscars, including Best Director and Best Picture, both of which went to Costner. He went straight from the ceremony back into the editing room of a movie whose first day he had essentially destroyed. Number 13, Robin Hood, Nearly Lost. Made Marion before it began. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio arrived to film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves 4 days before cameras rolled, already carrying the damage from her previous film, and the shoot ran so deep into winter that her actual real-life marriage license lapsed. Let's back up. Robin Wright had been cast as Maid Marian. She found out she was pregnant during pre-production and had to withdraw. Mastrantonio, Oscar-nominated for The Color of Money, coming off The Abyss, got the call with 4 days remaining before filming began. 4 days. Here's what you need to know about The Abyss. James Cameron's underwater epic was one of the most punishing productions in Hollywood history. Anne Mastrantonio reached her limit on that set. She had to be helped off it. She came into Prince of Thieves still carrying that weight. 4 days' notice, England in autumn, a director 10 weeks into a production that was already behind. The shoot stretched from September deep into January, long enough that the wedding license she'd taken out after marrying director Pat O'Connor in 1990 quietly expired. The paperwork was dead while she was still on set, filming a romance that wasn't hers. After the film was released, Mastrantonio stepped back. Smaller films, stage work. She came in 4 days before cameras rolled. She left on her own terms. Number 12, Robin Hood went mushroom hunting in full costume. This comes from Costner himself, told on The Rich Eisen Show. During a lunch break on location in Buckinghamshire, the forest camp where Reynolds had built the Merry Men's base, one of the stuntmen approached Costner. They'd become friendly over the course of the shoot. The stuntman looked at him and said, "You want to go hunt for some mushrooms?" Costner said, "What kind of mushrooms?" The stuntman said, "The good kind." And so, Kevin Costner, Robin Hood, fresh from directing and starring in a film that had just swept 7 Academy Awards, one of the most powerful stars on the planet, dressed in full medieval costume, walked out into a Buckinghamshire field with a stuntman to look for mushrooms of the illegal variety. The stuntman kept finding them. Costner couldn't find a single one. He asked how the stuntman kept locating them. The reply, "You have to eat one. It tells you where the rest are." And then Costner remembered he had a sword fight scheduled in about an hour with Alan Rickman. He backed out. He never confirmed whether the stuntman ate any before the fight. The sword fight happened on schedule. Nobody has ever reported anything unusual about Alan Rickman's performance that afternoon. Number 11. Azeem wasn't legend. He was a legal fix. Morgan Freeman's Azeem, wise, loyal, dry, magnificent, is not part of Robin Hood legend. The character was invented for this film, and he almost sank it before a frame was shot. When the screenwriters developed the character, they named him Nasir, a Moorish warrior sworn to Robin's side, bound by a life ode and a vow to see it through. They thought they were drawing on an old tradition. They weren't. Nasir was invented in 1984 for a British TV series called Robin of Sherwood, created by Richard Carpenter, where the character became one of the most beloved figures of the show. The Robin Hood production was unaware. They believed Nasir was a traditional part of the legend, the same way Little John and Friar Tuck are traditional. He's not. A stuntman named Terry Walsh happened to work on both productions. He'd been on Robin of Sherwood. Now he was on Prince of Thieves. And one day during filming, he mentioned, casually in passing, that Nasir wasn't actually part of Robin Hood legend, that Carpenter had invented him. The production team moved immediately. Freeman's character was renamed Azeem. The lawsuit never came. One stuntman. One offhand remark on one set. Audiences have spent 34 years believing Azeem was always part of the legend. He was not. He was an accident that became immortal. Number 10. Alan Rickman made the sheriff himself. Alan Rickman turned down the Sheriff of Nottingham twice. He was already tired of villain roles after Die Hard, and when he read the script, he had a single verdict: terrible. One-dimensional, no life on the page. He only said yes when given, in his words, carte blanche. Creative control. The character was his to do with, as he saw fit. So he took the script to a branch of Pizza Express, met playwright Peter Barnes, food going all over the pages, and asked him directly, "Will you have a look at this script because it's terrible, and I need some good lines?" Barnes came back with the corridor scene, the sheriff passing 2 women in a doorway, summoning them to his room one after the other. Then Rickman's longtime friend Ruby Wax came to his house and added 3 more words to the end of it. "And bring a friend." Then Rickman went to director Kevin Reynolds and told him 2 things. First, he was going to improvise a line threatening to remove Robin Hood's heart, with a spoon specifically, because it would hurt more. Second, nobody else on set would know it was coming. Reynolds agreed. The cameras rolled. Rickman delivered the line, then walked out of frame, and saw, in his own words, about 80 members of the crew just go, and he mimed stifling desperate, helpless laughter. The spoon line is in the film. So is "Cancel Christmas." So is every quip and snarl and dark little gesture that makes the sheriff the only character in Prince of Thieves who feels genuinely alive in every single frame. None of it was in the script. Number 9, the one-scene role that nearly became a real disaster. During the filming of his one scene, Brian Blessed's horse stumbled, threw him, and nearly landed on top of him. The crew moved, Blessed hit the ground. The horse came down close, too close. By pure luck, nobody was crushed. Blessed got up immediately and demanded another take. His role is Lord Loxley, Robin's father. One scene. In the film's opening act, the sheriff arrives at Loxley Castle and has him killed. His body hanging from a parapet is what Costner finds when he comes home. That is the full extent of it. This is a man who has attempted Everest 3 times, who survived a plane crash in the Venezuelan jungle, who trained as a cosmonaut. The most indestructible person ever employed on a medieval film. And his contribution nearly cost him his life. And he finished it without stopping, and audiences remember it for about 45 seconds before the plot moves on. The character didn't make it. The actor refused to follow. Number 8. The director locked out of his own hit. In the spring of 1991, the film was in post-production in Hollywood. Reynolds and editor Peter Boyle had cut a version of the film. Then, after a meeting on April 12th, the studio made its position clear. Reynolds was to be removed from the film. The following morning, Morgan Creek's chief operating officer Gary Barber informed editor Peter Boyle that his services were no longer required. That night, the locks on the editing room were physically changed. 3 assistant editors resigned in protest. Reynolds had no legal recourse. Costner, who was also a producer on the film, now effectively controlled the final cut. What followed was a version of the movie with more Costner and less Rickman. Because test screenings had shown the villain threatening to eclipse the hero, and someone decided to do something about it. Kevin Reynolds, who had directed Costner's first film, who had been hired because of their friendship, who had spent 4 months in an English winter filming on locations that required enormous logistical effort, walked away from the project weeks before the theatrical release. He did not attend the premiere of his own film. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves opened on June 14, 1991. It made $25.6 million in its opening weekend. It would eventually gross $390.5 million worldwide. Number 7. Sean Connery worked one day and kept nothing. In 1976, Sean Connery starred in a film called Robin and Marion, a late-career Robin Hood story. Audrey Hepburn as Marion, Richard Lester directing. Connery was Robin Hood. 15 years later, producer Penn Densham wanted him for a single scene at the end of Prince of Thieves. The role of King Richard, arriving just in time to bless Robin and Marion's wedding. Densham wanted the surprise kept completely secret. No credit on the poster, no marketing, nothing. The idea was that audiences who'd spent the whole film waiting for something would get Connery as a gift in the final minutes. He went through Connery's agent, CAA co-founder Michael Ovitz. Ovitz asked for $1 million. Densham said, "No, we're already over budget, but I guarantee you this will be part of film history." They agreed on $250,000. Connery worked one day. He had previously played Robin Hood. He was now playing the king. He did not get his name in the credits, and he donated every penny to a hospital in Scotland. Number 6. The song The Studio. Hated became bigger than the movie. Composer Michael Kamen had a melody. He wanted a woman to sing it, imagining the song from Maid Marian's perspective. Kate Bush said no. Annie Lennox was interested, but insisted on performing it in Old English, and that wasn't going to work. Lisa Stansfield's label killed it before she could say yes. Peter Cetera wrote his own version. Kamen said it was too pretty. The song needed someone who could deliver a sweet melody with enough raw authority to keep it from putting you to sleep. Bryan Adams and producer Mutt Lange wrote the song in 45 minutes. Adams later described it. They knocked it out, sat back to listen to it for the first time, looked up at each other, and grinned. They knew immediately. Then the studio hated it. The film was a period piece. The studio wanted period-appropriate instrumentation, lutes, mandolins, the sound of 12th century England. Adams refused to change a note. The studio relented, and then buried the song in the end credits, apparently convinced they had a throwaway B-side on their hands. It went to number 1 in 17 countries. In the United States, it held the top spot for 7 consecutive weeks. In the United Kingdom, it spent 16 consecutive weeks at number 1, from July 13th to October 26th, 1991. That is still the longest uninterrupted run at the top of the UK singles chart in history. No one has beaten it. Guinness confirmed it. It has sold over 15 million copies. Adams was on tour for the entire 16 weeks. He later told The Independent, "People were always saying, 'You're number one in England,' but I wasn't around to witness it. I was playing gigs, non-stop." The song the studio wanted to play on a lute is the longest-running number one in British chart history. Every single person who made a decision about that song made the wrong one, except the man who wrote it in 45 minutes and refused to change it. Number 5. The Prince of Thieves ended with a profit dispute. In July 2012, Kevin Costner filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court against Morgan Creek Productions. His legal filing opened by warning anyone hoping to earn profits from their films that Morgan Creek was one company you certainly do not want to do business with. His back-end deal entitled him to a percentage of receipts once the film crossed $60 million. He alleged Morgan Creek had been underreporting home video revenue by 90% and hadn't sent participation statements for 2 years running. Morgan Creek, CEO. James Robinson's public response: "We have paid him over $40 million. I think we've been very nice to him." The lawsuit ran for 2 years. A judge dismissed the fraud claim, but allowed breach of contract to proceed. The parties settled in 2014 with all terms sealed. Nobody got to say they won. The man who locked the director out of the editing room, the man who won Worst Actor at the Razzies for this film, the man who had already been paid $40 million from it, sued the studio that paid him, calling them the Prince of Thieves. The CEO said they'd been very nice to him. Both statements can be true. Number 4. Robin Hood was the first betrayal. Waterworld was the last. Reynolds and Costner go back to 1985 and Fandango. Reynolds directing, Costner in his first real starring role. When Morgan Creek needed a director to lure Costner, Reynolds was the answer. He came aboard with 10 weeks to prepare because Costner was his friend and he trusted him. You already know what happened to the editing room. Reynolds walked out weeks before the premiere, did not attend. Then, 4 years later, he and Costner made Waterworld together. Waterworld became one of the most notoriously troubled productions in Hollywood history. The budget collapsed. The set literally sank in a hurricane. Reynolds departed before the film was finished, and Costner took over the editing room. The same move on the same director for the second time. After Waterworld, Reynolds and Costner stopped speaking. A friendship that had survived the first betrayal did not survive the second. Reynolds continued directing. The Count of Monte Cristo, Risen. He told Den of Geek in 2008, "You'd make yourself crazy if you constantly dwelt on it." Reynolds gave Costner his first role. Costner's career swallowed what Reynolds built. It happened twice on 2 different films, and they never worked together again. Number 3. Robin Hood's most famous location was a lie. Every major location in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, was a lie. Sherwood Forest was Burnham Beeches in Buckinghamshire, a lovely woodland, historically significant, and directly beneath one of Heathrow Airport's flight paths. On the first day of filming there, unusual winds diverted all incoming Heathrow traffic directly over the location, jets screaming overhead. Unusable audio. The opening of the film, set in Robin Hood's forest, was being filmed while 747s roared past. Loxley Castle was Wardour Castle in Wiltshire. Marion's Manor was Holne Priory in Northumberland. The staff fight between Robin and Little John, the one on the log bridge over rushing water, was Aysgarth Falls in North Yorkshire, filmed in freezing water with no wetsuits because the costumes restricted movement. Actor Nick Brimble, who played Little John, later described standing next to a fire at lunch just to warm up, then putting his wet clothes back on and going again. And Nottingham Castle, the seat of power for the film's villain, was 3 different places. Its exterior, in long shot, was Carcassonne, a medieval fortified city in the south of France near the Spanish border. The courtyard was a backlot at Shepperton Studios, and the interior, where Alan Rickman delivered most of his best scenes, was St. Bartholomew the Great, a 12th century church in Smithfield, London. The movie set in Nottinghamshire, filmed in Buckinghamshire, Wiltshire, North Yorkshire, Northumberland, and southern France, never Nottinghamshire. The tree is the one that lands differently. the lone sycamore standing in a dramatic dip in the landscape beside Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland, became the film's most iconic image, a tree that had already stood for over 200 years before the film came along. After 1991, tourists started visiting it, specifically because of a Kevin Costner movie. In 2016, it was voted England's Tree of the Year. On the night of September 28, 2023, someone cut it down overnight. By morning, it was lying on its side across the wall. Kevin Reynolds heard the news on a boat off the coast of Turkey. He said, "I was just stunned. I was gutted. Then I was furious." Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers were convicted of criminal damage at Newcastle Crown Court in May 2025. In July 2025, they were each handed sentences of more than 4 years. Prosecutors had called it a mindless act of destruction. The tree is gone. A tree that had stood for over 200 years became famous because of a 2-minute scene in a Hollywood movie, and was destroyed 32 years later by people whose reasons have never fully made sense to anyone. Number 2. The same film gave Rickman glory and Costner shame. In early 1992, 2 separate awards ceremonies handed out trophies for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. On March 22nd at the BAFTA Awards, Alan Rickman won Best Supporting Actor for his performance as the Sheriff of Nottingham, a role he hadn't wanted, had rewritten in secret, and had then watched get trimmed from the cut. The British Academy, the most prestigious film institution in the UK, decided that Rickman's performance was the best supporting work of the entire year. Accepting the award, Rickman told the room, "This will be a healthy reminder to me that subtlety isn't everything." 1 week later, at the Golden Raspberry Awards, the Razzies, Hollywood's annual ceremony for the year's worst, Kevin Costner won Worst Actor for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. The star who had controlled the production, produced the film, overseen the edit, and ensured his own scenes were protected from the villain who threatened to outshine him, won Worst Actor. The villain who had been frozen out, rewritten, and cut, won Best Supporting Actor. Both awards were for the same film, 7 days apart. The man who produced and controlled it won the Razzie. The man who was cut from it won the BAFTA. Nobody who watched that play out in the spring of 1992 needed it explained to them. Number 1, the villain who saved Prince of Thieves. The script was, in Rickman's own word, terrible, one-dimensional, a villain with no interiority and no wit. He turned it down, then turned it down again. He said yes only when they offered him the freedom to make the character his own. And then he took that freedom seriously, in ways nobody anticipated. He sat down with playwright Peter Barnes and fixed the scenes that didn't work. He brought in Ruby Wax to add the finishing touches. He told only Kevin Reynolds what he was going to do, and Reynolds kept the secret. The rest of the cast had no idea. His co-stars stayed in character when he went off script because they didn't know he was going off script. The spoon threat, not in the script. Cancel Christmas, not in the script. The corridor scene with the 2 women, not in the script either. None of it was. Then those scenes were cut. The editor was locked out. The assistant editors resigned. Reynolds left. And still, even in the trim theatrical version, the sheriff is the reason anyone watches twice. Critics who hated the film stopped at Rickman. Every review, without exception. He showed up for a film he didn't believe in, made it something worth believing in, watched it be reduced, won the BAFTA anyway. The hero of Robin Hood. Prince of Thieves is not Robin Hood. It's the man who rewrote himself at a pizza restaurant, performed it for a director who pretended not to notice, and outlasted every single person who tried to make him smaller. And there you have it, 15 facts about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Which one landed hardest for you? Tell us in the comments, and tell us what we missed, because there are always more stories underneath. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next one. Until next time.